Hey, good morning, everyone. Josh of Severe Weather. Thank you for joining me. I hope everybody had a great weekend. I am going to talk about some areas we're going to be keeping an eye on here in the tropics as things may start to finally come to life here over the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to talk about the areas that I'm watching for some potential development here, as now the models are starting to pick up on some stuff that we need to be watching. We'll also chat some severe weather, nasty storms across the plains yesterday and last night. And we have ongoing severe weather threats today over portions of Oklahoma, Kansas, eventually getting back into parts of the south central U.S., Texas especially, and also up across the upper Midwest. So I'm going to chat some more about that later in the video as well. But thank you so much for joining me. Here's what we're going to be tracking over the next couple of weeks. We are getting into the season where we've got what's called a Central American gyre. This is a larger, broader circulation where if we get to a point where the sinking air stops and we start getting more rising air, which I do think will start happening here in the next couple of weeks, we've got a couple of potential spots to keep an eye on. I don't like to get too obsessed with any one model run, but we saw our first model yesterday showing a threat to Florida. Again, not a consistent signal yet, but something we do need to keep an eye on. But nonetheless, a very active start to our season so far when it comes to just rainfall in general. Starting to see that transition over to La Nina. Now, we're not there yet. In fact, we're pretty much neutral. We started heading in that La Nina direction here last week, and things have kind of gone back to neutral for the time being. But I think that's just a little bit of a bump in the road. We should get back down in that direction. And as a reminder, La Nina are temperatures that are about half a degree Celsius or cooler below the average in the eastern equatorial Pacific. That indicates westerly trade winds, which are more favorable for development in the Atlantic, less favorable across the Pacific. Last year, we were in El Nino despite that. Despite the fact that we were up in here and not down in here, we still had above average numbers of storms due to the very warm water. Right now, the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean, that is basically across the Caribbean and eastward, especially into the tropics, is running very warm. It's been the case the entire year. It's been the case last year. We're still over half a degree, almost 3/4 of a degree Celsius above the average. Anytime we're above average, that's more storm fuel in place for more storms. And the Gulf of Mexico continues to run very hot. Over the last couple of days, it's stopped warming with respect to average, but still a degree Celsius above average is very significant. Here's a look at our water temperature anomalies. This is where we stand versus the average from 1981 to 2010. And again, that's just a 30-year timestamp. It's not the entire history of the Earth, so who knows where we've been in the past. But right now, we're running warm. And the area of greatest concern is the Gulf right in here, the Western Caribbean, and portions of the main development region. Very hard to find places that are running below that average for the time being. And that is due to a longer term cycle that we're currently in on this part of the Earth. This is from University of Miami showing our ocean heat content, and well above the average, lots of deep, warm tropics. Warmth in the tropics and well below the ocean. So if a storm gets going with optimal conditions, it's got plenty of fuel to prime a rapid intensification, even here in early June. That's not saying we're going to see that happen right away, but it is something that we're going to have to watch with bated breath here as we get through the hurricane season. These are anomalies, and we are already running about 2 months above the average. This looks more like a profile you'd see in August or even early September. And of course, the more that we see this, the more concern there is for anything that does get going once we get optimal conditions. We could have all the hot water in the world, but if nothing gets into it that circulates, then it's just hot water. That's all it is. So we need something to trigger these storms to get going. But once they do, and I do think we'll see those in the next couple of weeks, then they could intensify more quickly than what we might be used to. Now, right now, looking at Zoom Earth, you can see things are relatively quiet as a whole across the world, really. We do have some disturbed weather south of Acapulco that has about a 20% chance, according to National Hurricane Center, becoming a depression, but that's not really, at this point, any kind of threat or anything we need to be worrying about. It's also going to be heading westward and into cooler waters. The rest of the globe is actually about as quiet as you can see for this time of the year. I don't think it's going to stay that way. As you get over here into India and in the Bay of Bengal especially, we do see some flare up of storms, which over time, once we get less wind shear, I think we could see more development. And some models are actually indicating something forms in the Arabian Sea close to Mumbai, which used to be Bombay. Some disturbed weather here as well in the Indian Ocean, but again, nothing of great concern. What we like to see this time of year is quiet weather east of the Philippines. I don't think it's going to stay that way, but for the time being, things are pretty quiet. And then we'll zoom in on the Atlantic, and you can see the monsoon trough is very active, more so than you would expect this time of the year, but no threats for the time being. This is the water vapor image from cyclonicwx.com, and you can see hostile environment for development for the time being. We do have a lot of action coming across, saturating the tropics, but we don't have the right amount of upper level divergence to get storms to actually be able to grow and grow into tropical systems for the time being. This is a look here at the, and I'm going to zoom in just so you guys can see. Here's a look at the infrared across the entire Atlantic, and I'll annotate it for you guys here as well. You can see multiple tropical waves, wave number 1, wave number 2, wave number 3 here in South America, wave 4, wave 5, and wave 6. So we're already looking like July out there in the tropics, but we don't have the optimal amount of wind shear. We have a lot more wind shear than what you would expect. We also don't really have a lot of rising air across the tropics. We just have a lot of disorganization, but a very active tropical basin for the beginning of June, that's for sure. And definitely a lot of rain still ongoing here around Hispaniola, around the Windward Passage and into the Southwest Atlantic. We've got a large cyclone here spinning off the Nova Scotia coastline, and that's not going to develop into anything. We also have a subtropical cyclone that is unlikely to be anything that's going to even get a name here, just north of the Azores. And I'm sorry, my pink is clashing here. We need to do a different color next time. How does that sound? We could do red, I guess. Here's the red. That's not any better. Maybe blue. But anyway, I'm going to clear that off the map. You guys saw it. If you need to pause and come back to it, that's great. If not, we're going to have to move on. Gulf of Mexico still looking very quiet. Storms that are hitting the Dallas area last night have moved into Louisiana. They'll fade as they move into the Eastern Gulf today. The Caribbean, pretty active, but nothing showing any signs of organization. A big flare up over Nicaragua. Lots of moisture, lots of rain over the Windward Passage and over the Mona Passage here near Puerto Rico. Not the best cruising weather here across the Greater Antilles, but the islands here are in pretty good shape. We're seeing some shower activity building up around Dominica and Barbados, but nothing of any organization. And here are those waves coming off the African coast. You know, I've been watching, and over the last couple of weeks, there's definitely been an uptick in that activity. But you could see here, all this cirrus that's getting blown off to the northeast indicates some pretty good westerly wind shear up and over. So we'll have all the thunderstorms in the world down in here, but until these get farther north and until the wind shear drops off, it's just going to be a little bit too early. And that's pretty common for this time of the year. The Pacific also has a very active monsoon trough, but nothing showing big time organization. Here's our area of disturbed weather, and it just doesn't look like it's getting its act together anymore. We like to look at Saharan dust. The more of it we see, first of all, the hazier the skies end up being over the Caribbean. Second of all, the more stable the air is. When this dust comes across, it promotes some sinking of the air, and that will obviously kill off our chances to see growing storms when you have that fighting against it. So over the next several days, we do see it continuing across, coming off of the African coast, but it does let up some by next weekend into the following week. Yes, there's going to be some pushes of it coming across, but generally speaking, once we get through this first wave here, we might see a little bit better, more optimal conditions for development here. You can see it's not quite as stable here over the Western Caribbean as it is here off the African coastline. Another thing that's interesting, and this has been going on for a while, but we're seeing a growing area of wildfires in southern Mexico, east of Acapulco, near the Gulf of Tehuantepec. We're going to see some of this actually streaming northward towards Houston and into Oklahoma the next couple of days. This obviously is good for tropical season, bad for air quality. Anytime we see this kind of wildfire smoke, but we expect to see smoky skies across southern Mexico and even continuing into the weekend over the Sierra Madre as well. Here's a look at the upper level pattern, and I'm going to take this across, and you'll be able to see fast westerlies here over the Gulf of Mexico. Will keep that wind shear hostile for storm development. Over time, though, as we get to about this time next week, we see those winds relaxing out of the west. We see more of an upper level anti-cyclone, high pressure system aloft right over Central America. That's what promotes that gyre. Once you get an area where the wind shear drops off, we start to see more organization of thunderstorms. You can see we've got a big trough in the east, so that's going to protect the U.S. for the time being. But the areas to watch will be around southern Mexico and Central America for that gyre to get going. And as we head into later next week, that gyre does start to shift a little bit farther north, and the wind flow aloft does start to relax into the southern Gulf of Mexico. So as we get, say, 10, 15, 20 days out, we start to see the framework for what should be a better environment for things to get going. Not going to happen right away. I don't think we're going to see rapid intensification of anything yet, even though the waters are very warm. It's going to be more of a gradual process, but one that we definitely need to start watching here in a couple of weeks. We're still on schedule here for a very active season. Just because we didn't have a storm before June doesn't mean we're not going to have one. In fact, if anything, the waters are actually more prime because we haven't used up that heat source as much as maybe what could have happened, if that makes sense. Here's a look at the upper level vorticity in the atmosphere. This is from the ensemble, and you can see that gyre starting to get going here over Central America. High pressure builds into the southern states next week. And we're going to see little pieces of energy kind of drop out of it, and any one of those could circulate into a weaker system. So again, I don't want to get too into the weeds with what could happen. I'm just going to kind of give you an idea of what we're taking a look at. So big trough in the east up until this time next week. And then the GFS showing something spinning up here, maybe going across Florida. Again, this is one model run. The next model run does not show something like this, so don't get too carried away with it. Not here to scare you guys into saying something like this will definitely happen, but the possibilities do start to grow a little bit more next week. But that's something we'll be watching. By the way, here's the next model run. It doesn't show anything like that. It actually shows something very weak, kind of getting picked up and brought across Cuba here in about 8 or 9 days and then heading out. It does show something else, though, forming in the Central Gulf and something here. But this is, again, just one model run, so we can't get too into the weeds with it at this point. I think the bigger picture here, the bigger story is you see all this dry air. So green indicates upper level moisture, cloud cover, rain, showers, and storms. Green indicates drier air, more stable air. As we get through this week, the Gulf is very stable. The Caribbean, though, is getting more and more unstable. As we head to next week, we do see some of this moisture trying to creep northward. It doesn't get into the Western Gulf just yet, but more the Southeastern Gulf, we start to see action here. And I don't want to get too carried away with storm complexes that try to drop into the Gulf, but we do see kind of the ridge building in. The heat that's in the western U.S. does expand somewhat towards the Ohio Valley, the northern plains around the middle of this month. And once that happens and that ridge sets up, we start to see the heat boiling up in the tropics, and we start to see more instability in place. So this is what things could look like in 2 weeks, and you can see all the moisture that's been down here eventually gets moved off to the north and west towards Mexico and towards the Gulf and into the Bahamas. So things are eventually going to change, but the big question mark is at what extent and at what speed does that actually happen? In the Pacific, you can see things are getting very active here. Our disturbance unlikely to develop here, but we are seeing some signs that maybe something could develop around next week. Again, this is off in the distance, so don't get too carried away with it. But we are seeing all these waves coming off of Africa are going to make their way into the Pacific, and there is going to be at least some enhancement in activity. The European extended forecast does show that happening here sometime in the next week, about a 40% chance of some sort of tropical development. The Atlantic side's pretty quiet through next week, but we start to see things starting to bubble up a little bit more. And generally speaking, more areas to watch as we get to about the middle of the month of June. And towards the end of June, off the East Coast as well, whether or not these are going to be old frontal boundaries or tropical waves that kind of get picked up. Either way, you can see that the chances begin to grow here, probably quicker than we want to realize. But before the end of the June, the possibility of at least one, if not two named storms in the Atlantic Basin. Taking a look at the ensembles here, here's some possibilities of where tracks may start and where they may go. Nothing this week, but as we head to next week, there's some semblance of something trying to develop here over the weekend into early next week. This is just one ensemble member, though. The others aren't showing it. We're not seeing a ton of low pressure system outlooks. We're seeing maybe one ensemble solution showing this, maybe another one showing it. But generally speaking, as we get to next week, there's at least some solutions hinting at something down in here. Maybe tracking nearer to the east of Florida and then away. There's also some instability after that. We see some more action over the Gulf of Mexico. Is this exact track going to happen? I would say very, very unlikely. The GFS model itself loves to start the season off with lots of storms that don't end up happening. That doesn't mean we're not going to see Alberto in the next couple of weeks. It just means we're probably not seeing 2 or 3 hurricanes coming out of the gyre here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So don't get too caught up in that. I'm just showing it for you guys to at least see what we're going to be tracking here over the next couple of weeks. The European ensemble isn't alone. It's also got something trying to come through Florida and up the East Coast here in about 10 or 11 days. But that's just one solution. It mainly has a lot of weaker scenarios here with a lot of uncertainty in where things are going to go. But if there's anything that I have learned here, it's that if something does pop up in the Gulf and the conditions are right, we're only going to have a couple of days to prepare for it. Really, we need to be preparing now just in case, because once we get to that time, everybody's going to react at the same time, and it's just going to be a little bit too late at that point. Having said that, a tropical forecast beyond 5 days is pretty useless, especially in the beginning of the season. Once we get into August and September and we see waves coming across, we see hurricanes affecting the Caribbean, at that point, we've got trackable features. But for now, we're just looking at some what ifs. So anyway, European is popping, the GFS is popping. We're going to see something, I think, in here, but we don't know how strong yet. Let's look at severe weather, severe heat over the Southwest, heat over South Texas. Most of the action has been across the Central Plains, and we do have some fog areas to watch as well. Lots of flooding as well over the last couple of weeks. We can see river flood warnings in effect over the Mississippi Basin, over parts of the Trinity Basin in Texas as well. And right now, the area of greatest concern is moving southeast across Kansas into Oklahoma. The east is pretty quiet. We have a weakness moving through the Carolinas that won't do much, but we do see this moisture surging eastward. And it's going to get more unsettled here over the eastern states over the next couple of days after a pretty decent weekend. The upper Midwest will also have some active weather. The west will stay unsettled. It'll be kind of cool and rainy across the Pac Northwest, but that heat is eventually going to build north in your direction. We have a slight risk for today posted across the southern plains all the way down into Louisiana. That includes Dallas-Fort Worth. We do have a risk for some tornadoes later on this afternoon, especially I think later this evening over the Red River area, big hail as well, and some strong winds. Tomorrow, or actually later today as well, we do have a slight risk now posted for parts of Wisconsin and northern Illinois, marginal risk for Chicago, northwest Indiana, down to St. Louis, mainly hail and severe wind, but there is somewhat of a tornado risk as well, and I'm going to talk about why that is. Tomorrow, that threat as it moves eastward falls apart. Another new threat will take over here over parts of the mid-Missouri Valley, Kansas City, Topeka and Lawrence, up to Omaha and over to Des Moines. Slight risk for severe weather. Right now, day 3, no areas outlined. I do think we do, as we get closer to that event, I do think we've got somewhat of a threat for severe weather somewhere here across parts of the southeast. And I'm going to talk about why here in just a little bit. Right now, the Storm Prediction Center keeps things quiet, but I just find it hard to believe we're going to have a quiet day overall. I think we're going to have some severe weather. We do have a severe thunderstorm watch till noon Central, 1 Eastern, extending from Wichita all the way down to the Oklahoma City metro. As you look at the HRRR model, you can see this complex of storms is going to race southeastward this morning and may still hold on over southeastern Oklahoma and southwestern Arkansas here later this afternoon, and perhaps even into tonight into northern Louisiana and into the Delta region of Mississippi. But behind it, additional storms firing up. This is the HRRR model. I'll show you another model, which I think is going to be more than likely more correct, but we'll see. And kind of a second complex that continues into tomorrow morning, all the way down into the western Gulf states. And that could clip the Dallas-Fort Worth area as well. Behind it, we are going to see more storms tomorrow night in Oklahoma, kind of our 4th round in 3 days, unfortunately. And flood problems are certainly going to be something we need to be watching for here into Wednesday morning. Severe winds expected with this complex of storms. The HRRR shows potentially 50, 60, 70 mile-an-hour winds in southern Kansas. even advancing into southwest Arkansas here by this afternoon and evening. Second complex could produce even worse wind over southwest Oklahoma or maybe neighboring North Texas around Childress, Wichita Falls. There is potential to see wind gusts that may approach 100 miles per hour, depending on which model run you follow. Taking a look here at the RRFS model, you can see this advancement of storms this morning to about Tulsa by lunchtime, and then that leaves, but more storms fire up here on another disturbance that follows later this afternoon. And these could be some big ones. We could see a few tornadoes, but massive hail and massive wind problems over western Oklahoma this evening, and then advancing into southern and eastern Oklahoma later tonight, and then down into North Texas. And if that weren't enough, we've got more to watch here late tomorrow into tomorrow night. So the storm chasers out of Norman are going to be pretty busy here over the next 2 to 3 days. Taking a look here at Northeast Texas, we got hit hard in Dallas again last night. This afternoon, I think they get a break, but we have to watch what's coming down from Oklahoma later on tonight. And 4 or 5 in the morning could be pretty busy here across Northeast Texas, and then maybe getting close to Houston tomorrow morning. Although at that point, I think we're going to see things weakening. And then here comes the next wave moving through the same areas on Wednesday morning. Arkansas could get hit here. I think the greatest threat is south and west of Little Rock, but we'll have to see. This first wave, we're going to have to see. It may hold together when it hits Fayetteville here mid-afternoon today, but probably weakening before it gets to Jonesboro. More storm activity here, though, overnight tonight into tomorrow morning. And then yet another system that moves into the region here by Wednesday morning. Louisiana's gotten a lot of rain, a lot of storms. Baton Rouge could get active here. Gonzales, those areas here late this afternoon. North Louisiana tonight, we're going to get hit. And tomorrow morning, we could see a disturbance that continues to send this complex of storms all the way down into South Louisiana by lunchtime tomorrow. And we may see flooding, we may see severe wind, and maybe some hail as well across this complex of storms. We're going to see more on Wednesday. This model stops around 1 in the afternoon. After that, I think we do have a threat for some severe weather. If you take a look at this global model, it's the European. You will see this front actually drops down into the area. And it's really hard to get too specific, but Wednesday afternoon, you can see somewhere along the I-20 corridor and maybe southward, I think there will be some heavier storms, and we could see severe weather with any of these. Right now, just a general thunderstorm outlook showing as we get closer to this tomorrow and especially Wednesday. The confidence level in the forecast should start to grow, and I do think we're going to see somewhat of an upgrade across that area. Finally, let's look at the upper Midwest. We have a mesoscale convective vortex, a spin in the atmosphere that's going to move through Iowa this morning, and then it should activate storms across Wisconsin here around mid-afternoon or so, tracking right through Madison, it looks like, and then over towards Sheboygan in the evening. On the southern side of this, there's going to be some pretty strong wind flow aloft, a little bit of wind shear as well. So we do need to be watching for some potential for severe weather late this afternoon and evening. It'll lift away and weaken tomorrow, so Michigan should be okay. And then after that, we'll have to keep an eye on something moving up into Indiana Wednesday morning, but the timing of that storm complex isn't ideal for severe weather. So here's what the RRFS model is showing. Scattered showers and storms early this afternoon crossing the Mississippi River and growing in size. Places like Stevens Point, Wisconsin Rapids, the Dells are all looking at potentially some severe weather around midday or so, and then mid-afternoon, and then late afternoon tracking farther eastward towards the Fox Valley and down towards Janesville, and maybe even getting towards Milwaukee around 7 o'clock. After about sunset, it does show weakening of these storms, but something we need to be watching here. And let me zoom you down to Illinois and Indiana real quick as well. And you'll see scattered showers and thunderstorms, but maybe some more intense storms over the northern part of Illinois early tonight. Rockford, DeKalb, Sycamore, Huntley, all the way over towards towards Schaumburg and the north side of Chicago around late evening tonight. Then things will move out and weaken. We may see some more storms tomorrow evening. At this point, we do have a marginal risk across this area. So keep an eye on all those storms as they move through. And then it looks like quieter weather expected for Wednesday. Well, that's all I've got time for, but I appreciate y'all's time today. As always, you guys mean a lot to me. I appreciate your time. My goal here, while it may seem like some hype, but it's to explore what could happen and start getting folks prepared. The goal is not to really scare folks at this point until there's very certainly going to be something that's going to be a problem. And you will know that. Everybody on YouTube will be talking about it. But right now, all we can really do is just start taking a look at things and start preparing. for what could be the worst. We see that happen so many seasons, and there's no point in thinking this season is going to be any better than the last few. So if you did enjoy this video, please consider becoming a subscriber. I thank you for your time. And as always, I give all the glory to God, who has given me this gift to be able to share things with you guys, to share the weather with you and prepare you for what could be some really nasty, rough weather. That's my calling from God. I think we all have spiritual gifts. Whether or not you choose to believe, God created you and he gave you some gifts. I just pray that he gave you the joy that he gave me through his son, Jesus Christ. John 15:9 says, as the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you. Continue ye in my love. If ye keep my commandments, ye shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things have I spoken unto you, that my joy might remain in you, and that your joy might be full. This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. And I will say that as humans in a fallen world, it is very difficult to have the joy and the peace that God has given those of us who have chosen to believe in him. The joy really comes in knowing that you're going to be facing these storms, and on your very best day, you're still going to have joy. You're going to have joy in the Lord, but on your very worst day, you're also going to have joy in the Lord, knowing that eternally there are treasures in heaven waiting for you if you choose to accept Christ as your Savior, and I have. But if you haven't, I still believe there's hope, and then that can happen, that things can change like they changed for me 10 years, 11 years ago. Having the peace and having the joy and knowing that what I'm doing matters and what everybody else is doing matters is what continues to push me to do what I do, to raise my family, to help my community, to help those of you on YouTube that are plugging in. And I just pray that you have that peace of mind and that joy, that no matter what happens to you, you are taken care of. You are wonderfully made, fearfully made, and you are important. And I just wanted to share that word of encouragement with you today. Just know that I'm praying over everybody who tunes in. And if you do have a specific prayer request, I would love to pray for you no matter what it is. I hope you all have a great Monday, and we'll catch you soon. Take care.